So hello everyone, welcome to another Black Women in HR talk. Today I'm joined with Uju, who is an author, blogger and mother of two. She's the creator of Babes About Town, a blog that focuses on family and lifestyle. And she's also the author of Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. Hi Uju, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Oh, yeah, I'm really good, really excited to kind of see your thoughts and insights about a couple of questions that we had.
Okay.
So firstly, just wanted to start off by asking, so you're the author of Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. What inspired you to actually write this book?
Yes, as I mentioned in sort of the introduction or preface to the book, the idea was kind of, I won't say forced upon me, but thrust upon me by somebody, by a relative who thought it would be a great idea for a book and that I was, the perfect person to write this book. And at first, I really didn't think I was. I wasn't sure that I was someone who fitted in this space of writing about race and, putting myself out there almost as an expert on race, because I thought, well, I don't have a degree in critical race theory. I'm not an academic, what would I write about? How would I fill a whole book? And then when I sort of sat down and started kind of talking to myself, journaling, writing, thinking about it, talking it over with my husband, I discovered that I had so much knowledge within me and so much experience and so much that I wanted to share. And also I wanted to approach it in a kind of mother to mother way, as opposed to coming at it as like an academic and I've got all these facts and I've got all this like hard-hitting stuff. I wanted to tell stories. So that's kind of the way the book is. It is filled with lots of research, but it's mainly about the stories, not just my stories, but stories from, I had over 20 contributors, who I interviewed, and their stories I think really bring the book to life.
Yeah, as you said, like you've approached it from a very kind of personal, more of a personal twist rather than an academic one. What would you say are the main points that in the book that you would like to share for someone that maybe hasn't read it yet and is looking to pick it up?
Yeah, so I think the main points are, as somebody said to me the other day in an interview, they're like, what they love about the book is that in every chapter is the word like talk to your kids, talk to your family, talk to, your community. So the main message of the book is really conversation, like open up these conversations, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's awkward. It's really important for all of us to start talking about race in a much more open and positive and inclusive way, but specifically for our kids. Our kids need to have a language to be able to describe who they are in the world, where they belong and how they relate to others. So it's just, that's the central message. And I would say another thing about the book is that, like you said, it's filled with stories, but it's like stories backed with research. And then at the end of each chapter, I've included what I call talking points, which are kind of questions that I'd had sort of from friends, family, within the community, readers, around race, around various aspects, from like a Black parent asking about what to say to her child who is worried about a friend who, told her skin was dirty, for instance. So I have like questions and answers to kind of give you an example of what you could say, or to give people sort of more context as to how to describe and explain race to their kids.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I feel like a lot of times when kids ask questions about race or like, why is this person different? I think we're quick to kind of hush them and kind of, oh, don't ask that. But I think that kind of makes the issue more of a taboo and kind of makes them think, well, I'm not allowed to think like this. Maybe I'm not allowed to ask certain questions. And then they grow up being essentially ignorant. So yeah, I think that's such amazing advice, especially for mothers and parents.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's the thing with, topics like race or, sex, sexuality, when parents feel hesitant to talk about it, you create this, like this elephant in the room, or sort of whatever, this feeling that there's some big thing that nobody can say because it's too difficult. And actually, when you talk to kids, and half the time they just take it at face value, or you can have like literally like a 5-second conversation and then they'll move on to something else, and then you come back to it. So it's like ongoing conversations, and before you know it, it's like just an everyday part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of just becomes the normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people see you as like this inspiration. Personally, me too. Do you have any advice for like any young professionals, especially any young women, young Black women, young brown women that are looking to become an author or get into that kind of blogging author space?
Yeah, advice for any author is just to keep writing. Like if you have a passion for writing, or if you have an idea that you really want to share, you have a story that needs to be told, just keep writing. That's the number one thing, because a lot of people, you'd be surprised. I mean, I've been a writer like my whole life, essentially. Since I was a child, I was writing. And then, but anytime you say to people you're a writer, they'll be like, oh, I have this story, or I have this book idea. But it's like, well, are you writing? Like,
Yeah.
do you write? It's one thing. Everyone wants to have written a book, but no one actually wants to do it. So I would say just keep writing. And also don't be afraid to kind of explore different types of writing, because you never know what's going to stick. That's one thing that I love about blogging. Like, I've been blogging for over 10 years, and it kind of gives you the freedom to develop your voice, and to, as well as to develop an audience, but really to just develop like, creative freedom around how you express yourself and sounding like yourself. It's really important when you write to be authentic and to sound, like yourself on the page, because that's one of the things that attracts readers to you. So keep writing, keep writing in your own voice, like the way you sound, the way you speak. And and go outside of your comfort zone from time to time, like write something completely different, try a poem or a play or something, anything, just give it a go.
Yeah, I think that's nice. Yeah, the idea of kind of exploring different avenues, see what I guess you suit best and what you receive most enjoyment from. I think that's really good advice. Yeah. And as you mentioned, you are a blogger and you have your blog, Babes About Town, and you've also got a digital consultancy, Mothers and Shakers. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Mothers and Shakers came up with that idea when been blogging for a few years, and I'd met a lot of other bloggers who we were all interested in doing something together. We couldn't really quite figure out what. And I had this idea for like, kind of crack team of bloggers all working together to help brands. And so we formed like, I can't even remember when it was now, 2013, 2014, launched Mothers and Shakers, which is like a digital consultancy, and we would help family-friendly brands or mums in business who wanted to sort of boost their presence online. So that was the main thing. Then it's kind of evolved over the years to, we started doing like workshops, blogging workshops, and workshops for people who wanted to get into the online space. At the moment, especially during the pandemic, like most of our services have been on pause. So it's more like private consulting for people who want to start up, like start up a blog, or, try to launch their business creatively online. But yeah, we'll see what happens. It's interesting continuing to evolve.
Yeah, I think like you said, with the pandemic and everything, we've had to evolve in everything we do and in every aspect, and try find how we could make the best out of such a horrible situation. And I think you're a massive inspiration in terms of, you've written publications before for The Guardian and Time Out, and now you've kind of, I would say, found your own space and made out your own path with your own businesses that you have and your own book. And many people, as I mentioned previously, do see you as, an inspiration in terms of parenthood and in terms of being an author and being a blogger. Going on to, I guess, a more serious topic, do you have any advice to parents who are worried about kids' safety? And I would say maybe especially in London, where we've got such big issues, especially like knife crime. So young kids, have you got any advice to parents?
Yeah, you'll hear me take a big breath,
Yeah.
because that's my number one piece of advice, is always like, just stop and take a breath. It is scary raising your kids in London, especially with, like last month alone, the numbers of knife crime and gun crime, and then also kidnappings that seem to be happening lately, and kids going missing, young black people going missing. It feels very overwhelming. And I think my main piece of advice with parents, which I say, which is why I sort of advocate conversation, because with conversation about building relationships and have a positive and open relationship with your child, where they feel they can talk to you about race, they can talk to you about sex. They're not going to tell you everything, especially when they get to a certain age, but at least they feel like they can come to you if they're in trouble or if they need help. So it's building that relationship. So always checking in with your child, and also having a conversation with them every now and then about specific things that are worrying, like, if knife crime has gone up in your neighborhood, you sit with your child and have a conversation with them about what do they do if, for instance, they see a violent incident, or if, for instance, they happen to encounter somebody with a weapon. What do they do? How can they get away safely? Can they turn to a trusted adult? Can they just leave the situation? Trust your gut instinct as well. If something doesn't feel right, then trust that. Don't just kind of linger in case things get better. Just trust that this is not okay. So just check in with your kid, make sure they know what to do, like how to not hold their phone out in the street, for instance, if they're strolling down the road. Yeah, I had to tell that to my son, because he'd be like strolling down the road, like looking at his phone. I'm like, no, you cannot do this. And especially not if you're by yourself, walking
100%.
down. So yeah, I wrote about this, about a chapter in Bringing Up Race, which is, about raising kids in the city, but it really, I talked about the conversations that I've had with my eldest, who's now 15, around keeping himself safe, and how, as a parent, no matter what, you're always going to be worried. So we sit here in London and we're like, oh my goodness, it's so stressful. But wherever you are, like, that's the common factor of parenting, is that you're going to be worried about your children. On some level also, you've got to calm yourself down, take a breath, and, talk to your kids and hope that everything will be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's such a tough world to navigate, especially as a child. But like you're saying, that channel of trust between you and your child, as long as it's there and that they know they can come to you with any questions or fears, that anything that could have happened, I think it helps keep that relationship open, so that nothing kind of goes undetected, especially in today's climate, like you were saying, with lots of kidnappings going on, especially in London, to keep that eye out and make sure that you're available for them to ask you questions, I guess, so that they know, okay, what do I do in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question we had was, do you think that the school curriculum has embraced diversity and inclusion, and more specifically to do with Black history?
In a very short answer, no.
Yeah.
Not at all. Yeah, I find it really sort of disappointing and disheartening, not only that the curriculum is still so narrow, but that the government we have currently doesn't seem to want to do anything about it. In fact, they want to kind of go in the reverse and teach less about Black history and kind of pretend that race is not an issue, and that racism is not a problem. All of these things are detrimental to the health of our society as a whole. Because when you think about Black history, sometimes you're thinking, oh, Black people, we need to see ourselves represented. And that's absolutely true. Like, representation matters. It's really important. Like, representation matters for white kids, for like the whole of society, to see Black history and Asian history and all the different elements that contribute to this country. They need to see this in a positive light and in a way that they understand like how all our stories join together, the negative bits and the positive bits. So it's really, really like, it does my head in.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of campaigning and, people, grassroots organizations like the Black Curriculum that are really making waves in this area. And it frustrates me that it has to be still the grassroots as opposed to the government deciding that, okay, let's do something about this and let's properly change the curriculum and make it inclusive for everybody. So yeah, there's a long way to go, but I am hopeful that there are some changes happening from the grassroots.
Yeah, I feel like that seems to be an overarching kind of note of, we just brush everything under the rug and, there's no racism here, there's none of that here, when actually if you look at the current climate and even if you just look at last year's movement in terms of Black Lives Matter, what have we actually done in terms of furthering that and kind of teaching kids? Because I mean, there's where school is the main place where they're going to get this education. How do we intertwine all of this so that they are aware of it? Because you need to be aware of what's going on. Everyone does, not just in terms of, I guess, representation, but to know what others are going through and what they have gone through. I think it's such an important thing. And I completely agree with you that the government has not done enough. And yeah, it's quite sad to see.
It's very sad to see. And like you said, like the whole point of teaching history is not just so you can sit down and learn a few facts. It's about learning about the story of who we are and how we got here. And if you're teaching a very narrow idea of history, then what are we learning? We're not learning. Yeah. You just stay stuck in the same cycles, which is what has happened to us. And especially in this country where Britain tends to, put itself up on this, bit of a pedestal, like, oh, we don't have a race problem. And, we're very tolerant society. Tolerant is one of those words that becomes quite loaded because, it's like, oh, we're being tolerated, as a Black person in Britain. Oh, you're tolerating me. Well, how kind of you. So yeah, it's really, it's just, like I said, there's a long way to go, but, hopefully more schools and, education unions are getting involved and realizing that they need to do more, because it's across the board, like teacher training, school policies around race, equity, diverse. There's just so much work to do, but hopefully more people are going to get involved.
Absolutely. Well, this was a really insightful conversation, and I want to thank you for coming and talking to us, because we did have a lot of people asking for us to talk to you, and I think you're such a massive inspiration for all of us. And the Black Women HR community is all about empowering young individuals and I guess making sure we're all represented, and I think that's what you stand for, and it's just amazing to hear from you and see everything that you're doing.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, and I think it's brilliant that that there's organizations like yours that are actually doing the work and sort of standing in the gap and providing the services that are needed. That's one of the things that you have to give credit to Black people across the board, is that sort of resourcefulness and creativity.
Absolutely.
And, just a desire to continue being amazing no matter what. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.